All right, so I'll try to make this quick. Um, I'm with Shareable, representing the From Stories to Action project. It's a partnership between Shareable, Transition US, Post Carbon Institute, and New Stories. We've also brought in the Upstream podcast as another partner on the project. And what we're looking at is kind of the um, what happens during crises and how communities respond. So we're kind of framing it around the idea of disaster collectivism, and looking at, kind of the ways that the communities come together in the short and long term after a crisis, regardless of government or top-down NGO response. And there's just so many great examples, and it's a very kind of undertold story. And what happens is that people that are experiencing a disaster are often either framed as victims, or they are framed as animals that are kind of this really base nature comes out, which then is a justification for further marginalization. And for the most part, those things are completely untrue. And that there is a certain amount of kind of negative things that come out of it, and definitely people are incredibly negatively affected by disasters. But for the most part, people come together and rise to meet this challenge. And so we're really working to tell those stories and to kind of bring out a new narrative around crisis and the way we react to crisis, and also looking at how funding is distributed and how it can be better distributed. So this is the second year of this project. We got half the funding that we asked for last year, and we're encouraged to come back. And in the first year of the podcast, we're really looking at three stories, looking at the Northern California fires, at Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and then at in Sandy as well, Hurricane Sandy. And we're still finding the producer for Puerto Rico. We've had a kind of a hard time with some language barrier issues, and also conflicts of interest from a number of the producers that we found that actually otherwise would have been really great for the project. And so that's one thing that we're looking for, more contacts in Puerto Rico if anyone wants to offer that. But in Northern California and New York City, the projects are both already underway. In Northern California, we're looking at the ways that immigrant populations were affected by the fires, kind of diving into some new aspects of the Undocu Fund, and the ways that it was used to support marginalized communities that weren't able to access funds in other ways, and also kind of looking at that, looking at the rebuilding process and the kind of the push to rebuild quickly, but the marginalization that's taking place there. And so that's one of the stories. Another story in New York, we're going to be looking at Occupy Sandy and going back and looking at the kind of the longer term effects of that on the area, and kind of diving into the story a little bit, looking at, there was just so many great things that came out of it, but there was also a lot of lessons to be learned that don't always make it into the story. Either there's a lot of times it's kind of really negative coverage, or it's overly positive. And there's a lot of great stuff there to kind of really grow this kind of community response to disasters. So that's the podcast we've done so far. And this next year, the plan is to look internationally. And we've got a bunch of different potential stories that we're looking at, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. We're thinking about the earthquakes in Mexico City and La Brigada, the flooding in Bangladesh. That was an incredibly underreported story from last year. The earthquakes in Nepal in 2015, and the earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011, just as potential stories. Still looking at that as the theme. And then the learning cohort is something that's also already underway, that's being led by Transition US and New Stories. And there's in addition to those two organizations that are participating, there's 17 participants that have signed up for the first learning cohort. They had the first session about 2 weeks ago, looking at just getting everybody to get to know each other and to learn about the different stuff that people are working on in their communities and why they came together. And there's teachers and firefighters, and there's interest from members of FEMA and a number of different community organizers are all participating in this together. The majority are from the US, with one coming from Canada and two coming from Europe. And in the coming weeks or coming month and a half of the learning cohort, there's going to be 2 more sessions. And everybody that's participating in this session is going to be working on local community resilience projects. And so with this second round of funding, we hope to do another learning cohort next year. There was about 50 people that registered their interest in participating, but only 20 were able to participate at this point in time. And then also with the second round of funding, we are hoping to get seed funding for those local community resilience projects. And to participate in the project, we asked participants to put down $200. There was also available to participate for free, but the ask was $200, most of which put down that money, and 150 of that is being returned at the end of the session if the participants go through the entire cycle. And then the goal is, with this additional seed grant from TRCC, is that we will be doubling the initial investment and providing them more kind of just seed funding to start their local community resilience projects.
Great, thank you, well done. Questions for Tom?
Yeah, is there, where's like the main portal where we can go to see what's come out of the project so far in the last year? Is there like a single URL or a single place?
So we're going to be developing a page in the next couple of weeks. So far, we've got there is a page I can share about the learning cohort. But the podcast, except for like the page with the RFP for the producers, there isn't a specific page for the entire project yet. So we're waiting for the stories to come together a little bit better before we even share them publicly.
Okay.
Of what they're going to be. But the idea is that the podcast this round are going to be coming out in August, in the 3 weeks leading up to the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, and kind of bringing this into the narrative around disaster and around climate change. And so, and then we're going to be doing an event in Oakland at the end of September, 2 weeks after the climate talks, specifically about disaster collectivism.
Tom, how do you plan, besides those initial offerings, do you have a good source of getting those podcasts out beyond, just your local network?
Sure. So all the podcasts are going to be, there's the 3, so we're doing 3 in this set, and this is kind of like the proof of concept. The idea is to do a lot more. Every episode is going to be 29 minutes, so it's going to be radio ready. And we're going to be sending them out to independent radio stations all over the place. We're also looking into getting a more known host. And we've got a short list for hosts for the podcast. The idea is that each set of 3, like each season, would have a different guest host. And we've got connections to some pretty notable people that we're passing around that would kind of elevate that. And also, like the producers, like the producer that's doing our story from Northern California is a regular contributor to KALW, which is the San Francisco PBS station.
Great.
And so she has connections, and we're bringing in people that have existing podcasts and existing radio connections to be able to get it out farther and wider.
Good. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Magenta.